It's a taboo to talk openly about mental illness. 2 years ago, I attended the Luther Academy of the Rockies, which is something that Jennifer and I have done with the kids as a continuing education event. It takes place up in the mountains above Estes Park in Colorado. It's a beautiful place to go. And the seminary always finds really excellent speakers to come. Usually they have a current faculty member at the seminary I attended, which is Wartburg Seminary. And they'll have, they try to break it down into three categories. They break it down into somebody who's really good with like the theology piece, somebody who's really good with something practical, and somebody who's really good with pastoral care. And so they will lay out those three options, and they'll get three speakers who come and present a series of lectures over the course of 10 days while we are in the mountains in that beautiful setting. It's a great experience and something we feel really good about going to every year, and I've learned a lot. And I'm going to take 1 second to be a dad. Annalise, could I have a parent who would be willing to help Laura go visit Bryn in the nursery? She refused earlier, and I thought it might be okay, but I was wrong. It's okay. Go say hi to Miss Bryn for me. It's okay. We'll see you in a little bit. I love you too, sweet pea. Ah, those magical moments of parenting. If it were any other topic and any other night, I think I'd probably be able to work past it, but this one's a little different. 2 years ago, when we were at Luther Academy of the Rockies, the speaker in pastoral care was Dr. Bob Albers. He's actually been a pastor in the Nebraska Synod and was for many years. He also was on the faculty at Luther Seminary, and he spoke on matters of pastoral care for what he called unsanctioned illnesses. In fact, if you Google the phrase unsanctioned illness, his book is the first result that comes up on Google. And an unsanctioned illness is an illness that we are not okay with people having. It's an illness that we do not accept as a society as being a legitimate thing that people can talk about openly. We certainly shouldn't talk about it. We probably should feel ashamed for even having it. And while there are other illnesses, which are unsanctioned illness that go beyond mental health, in the past and to a fairly significant extent in the present, diseases like HIV would be an example of something where it was for a long time very taboo to talk about your HIV status. Tonight we are talking about mental illness. And especially in the context of depression and suicide, there are so many ideas and so much cultural baggage, so many taboos connected to the idea of being clinically depressed or fighting some other form of mental illness like bipolar disorder or schizophrenia or any number of other problems, that we feel as if we cannot be honest except with very close friends about the struggles that we face. Just as J.D. Shrem was saying the first time that he had spoken in a public forum about his battle with depression and how it eventually led him to a suicide attempt, this is my first time talking in any public forum with my struggle with depression. I'm grateful that I've never gotten to the point where I actually attempted suicide, but I struggled with that on a daily basis for years of my life. And I've struggled with it for a long time, over 20 years. As a middle school age student, I can remember thinking about ways that I could take my life and had some really bad ideas around that. And I absolutely refused to get help. Even back then, I understood that those were not normal thoughts. Those were not things that you ought to to struggle with, and if you are, that there's something wrong. People were becoming more aware of the idea of mental illness not being something wrong with your personality or something morally insufficient about you. People understood that those things are connected to physical problems, chemical imbalances. Those kinds of things are real and medical in nature. It wasn't something that I chose, but for some reason, through no fault of my own that I can see, through no fault of my parents that I could see, but I had absorbed from the culture the idea that to feel depressed is something that I must have chosen for myself, because after all, we pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps. And if you want to get over your depression, just think happier thoughts. In fact, I genuinely believed that what it meant to go see, for example, a counselor was something that weak-minded people did. And that if you were a truly strong person who had their stuff together, you would never do that because you wouldn't need to. And I thought that medications would make me dull and stupid and laughable. And I already struggled with the idea of being laughed at because I was bullied a lot as a child. And so I refused to get help. I regarded it as a normal part of life for years, that sometimes I would feel like killing myself. Even though to every outside observer, I kind of had my life together. Had good education, I had a beautiful wife. Eventually kids came along and they're awesome too. Annalise, don't get a big head. But everybody on the outside would look and say, things are going pretty well for you. I mean, not perfect, but not bad. And on the inside, things were a hot mess. 2 years ago, as I sat in the little lodge where we were having our lectures at Luther Academy of the Rockies, Dr. Albers was describing symptoms of depression commonly found in men, and I realized that he was talking about me. And he talked about the impact that depression in men had on families, and I realized he was talking about my kids. And it was such a struggle, because I was functional, I was moderately successful, I was more or less holding my life together, but I was miserable. I knew by then that depression shouldn't be a taboo. After all, I mean, I was the pastor here at the time. And I don't want anybody to feel bad about not seeing it, because I was a master of disguise. I almost kind of prided myself on not showing the problems. But I was truly miserable. And as a pastor, I would encounter people who struggled with mental illness, who struggled with depression, and I had nothing but love and care for people who had that. And I knew that people needed to have help in the form of counseling and needed to have help in the form of medication if they wanted to be restored to wholeness. I understood those things for other people, but I was unwilling to seek it for myself. But after that conversation and later an email exchange with Dr. Albers, and he may not even know how much he helped fix my life, but certainly maybe even saved it. I sought help in the form of medication and counseling, and I began a healing process that has continued to this day. And I found that as I've taken the opportunity to share that story of struggling for so long with what can rightly be called a mental illness, struggling in the shadows and trying so hard not to let anybody see the real pain I was in. As I've been able to start sharing that one-on-one with people, I've realized that sharing that story can be more healing for people around me than the taboo and the shame of holding it inside, afraid of what people will think. So, ladies and gentlemen, at Spirit of Grace and around the world via Facebook Live and YouTube, I don't care what you think anymore. If you're so stupid as to think that this is somehow my fault or a sign of weakness, I pity you. But I know that I'm among friends here. And I found that as I share that story, that people who also struggle with depression and anxiety and things like that, connected to that, feel isolated and alone. They feel like it's their fault because we've encouraged this culture of positive thinking, and if I can just think positive, everything will be okay. Sorry, folks, but in the case of clinical depression, that's bull. And that sharing my struggle hasn't just been some way that I can help others, but it's also been therapeutic for me. So thank you. You all get to be therapy for me tonight. Rather than thinking of it as some sort of a shameful illness that unless you've had it, you can't possibly understand, I would just emphasize, yes, unless you've had it, you can't possibly understand. And some of the ways we talk about things like depression are really unhelpful, in the same way that some of the ways we talk about things like migraine are really unhelpful, okay? If you have a really bad headache, you don't have a migraine. That's not the same thing. Migraine is a technical term for a cluster of other stuff that comes along with that, generally speaking. And, really bad headaches are bad, and I don't want to knock anybody who's had a really bad headache. But you throw other things on top of that, like the sensitivity to light and to sound, and the fact that normal painkillers don't seem to touch it, and things like that. That's a migraine. Having a really bad headache because you had a bad day at work, I'm sorry for you, but it's not a migraine. Don't talk about it that way. It's seriously painful and debilitating. And I struggle with migraines once in a while, although I figured out that the trigger is caffeine. As long as I keep drinking caffeine, I'm okay. So if you wonder why I vibrate most of the time, it's really therapy. If I don't have at least a couple cups of coffee a day, I have an honest-to-God migraine. So I just don't do that anymore. I used to think I needed to avoid caffeine. Quite the opposite. Coffee is my lifeline. But if not having actual migraines, you try to say, oh, well, I've had a bad headache, I know what that's like. No, you haven't. But you can still be sympathetic. You might have had that before, but to say that you've had a bad headache, you understand. No, you don't. Attempting sympathy instead of empathy sometimes rings very hollow. I've never had cancer, thank God, and maybe I never will, maybe I will. But I don't go to somebody who has cancer and say, man, I know exactly how you're feeling. I had a wart removed one time, and it was really painful. That sucks. And people who do that need to stop. Sympathy isn't the answer. The idea of saying, I've shared this experience so I can know how you feel. But empathy is still very real and very helpful. Maybe we need to start treating depression more like cancer. We, generally speaking, don't blame people for their cancer. We do get a little looking down our nose when people have lung cancer that came from smoking, although hopefully we're getting over that, because we have to acknowledge that the tobacco industry lied to people for decades about that stuff. I mean, we sympathize, perhaps, or at least we try to empathize, and in the case of cancer, if you've never had cancer, as I haven't, I know that I really don't know what that experience is like, but I do know something about cancer which I think is applicable in a broader sense. Sometimes it's something people can get better from, and sometimes it's a lifelong struggle. And sometimes cancer ends lives. And we need to be more honest and open about depression and suicide, because depression does end lives. There are alternatives to suicide. As he was saying on the video, it does get better, much better. It's amazing to me that I can look at the world that I live in now as opposed to 2 years ago, and it seems like things are okay in a way that they've never been. It boggles my mind even today, although I'm starting to get used to it. But there are ways out of the painful trap of depression. Modern science is a beautiful thing. And there is hope for those with other unsanctioned illnesses, whether that's other mental illnesses like anxiety disorders or schizophrenia or bipolar or those kinds of things, or if it's for diseases that we tend to judge those who have them, like venereal diseases or HIV or the like. if we don't talk about these things, if we keep them in the closet, if we make them something that is taboo and we don't let people out to talk about it, all we do is reinforce the culture of silence that drives people to isolation and despair. It only gets better when we break society's rule and we start talking about it. Now, because I'm a responsible pastor, there are a few other things I need to say to you. First of all, I didn't share this with you tonight to get your sympathy, and I don't want it. And I'm not saying that because, oh man, I'm so wounded, you need to help me. I've got great support systems. I have a loving wife. My kids are awesome. I've got friends and family who know about the struggles that I've been through and continue to wrestle with from time to time. I don't need more of that. My role here is not to be the recipient of your sympathy. My role is to be your pastor. I don't need to be cared for because I already am being cared for. So let me say this loud and clear one time and we can be done. I am your pastor, not your project. But I also want you to hear this. If you struggle with depression or with suicidal thoughts, you are not alone. Because I can tell you that across our church and across this community, I've talked to so many people who are afraid to talk about it just like you are. You are not alone, and you'll find in me somebody who will never tell you that I know how you feel, but I'll say I've been down a parallel road, and I know how much it hurts, and I want you to get you help. So don't raise your hand, and don't write it on a response card, but make the decision to come talk to somebody who cares, and I would love to be that person for you if you need it. But one way or another, for your sake and for the sake of your family and your friends and the people around you, whether you struggle with mental illness or you are connected in some way to somebody who is, because pretty much everybody in this room is one or the other or both. Reach out, because people care way more than I ever really imagined they would. I'd like to close tonight with Psalm 30, and I'm not putting it on the screen, and I mean, if you've got your bulletin, you want to read along, you can, but I just want to read this to you, and I'd like this to be just an exercise in listening. I will extol you, O Lord, for you have drawn me up and did not let my foes rejoice over me. O Lord, my God, I cried to you for help, and you have healed me. O Lord, you brought up my soul from Sheol, restored me to life from among those gone down to the pit. Sing praises to the Lord, O you, his faithful ones, and give thanks to his holy name. For his anger is but a moment, his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may linger for the night, but joy comes in the morning. As for me, I said in my prosperity, I shall never be moved. By your favor, O Lord, you had established me as a strong mountain. You hid your face. I was dismayed. To you, O Lord, I cried, and to the Lord I made supplication. What profit is there in my death if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you? Will it tell of your faithfulness? Hear, O Lord, and be gracious to me. O Lord, be my helper. You have turned my mourning into dancing. You have taken off my sackcloth and clothed me with joy, so that my soul may praise you and not be silent. O Lord, my God, I will give thanks to you forever. People of God, there are broken and beautiful people around you, all around you, in your midst, everywhere you go. It's so much more common than you realize. Open your eyes and watch for them. In Jesus' name, amen. We've come to the point in our service where we're going to take a look at our bulletins. So I'd like to invite you to get those out at this time. Apologize for the bulletins not coming out earlier because the printer ran out of paper and nobody Nobody checked. So we got a few of them come out, and then we're like, oh, well, that's it. But we got that all fixed, and we are in good shape now. So if you don't have a bulletin or something to write with, please raise your hand, and a member of our First Impressions team will bring one to you. I'm going to have my hand up because in the scramble to fix the printer and all that, I didn't grab one for myself. So thank you very much. I got a pen. In fact, I've got a pen with your name on it, Ken. It does. It's got his address and everything, and his phone number. Which probably means I stole it from him. I guess I shouldn't be admitting that, but. All right, so to get started, if you'll fill out the response card on the front, let us know that you were here tonight. We would sure appreciate that. And when you've finished with that, you can flip it over to the back. I've got a couple things to show you there. Our bulletin question tonight, I'm just encouraging you to open your eyes and ears. And so maybe today or tonight, as we've been talking about this a little bit, somebody came to mind. And if that's true, then I would encourage you to write down that name in the question this week. I will be a listening ear to this person. And then if you are willing to be so open as to share, if you would be willing to respond to the message tonight by sharing your experience with how your family has been touched by mental illness, I'll tell you and assure you that your responses are kept confidential, and I won't use them in any way that would embarrass you. But I would, if you're willing to share that story, that would be appreciated. Also, if we can pray for you in any way, please fill in your prayer request in the response card, and if you need it kept private, check the box and we will keep that confidential. While you are working on that, a couple of things to let you know about. First of all, we have one more week of our series Rule Breakers, so please join us for one more night of soup and worship. Hold an evening prayer next Wednesday night. However, things will be a little bit different for the youth, and so parents of middle and high school students, your ears need to perk up, because our middle and high school youth groups will be going to the Jason Wren presentation at the Tassel that night. Robbie and Devin France who've been working with our high schoolers, will be taking middle and high school students to that presentation and doing that with them. So they can come and join us for soup, and then about 6:45, as the worship is getting started here, they'll gather up students, and hopefully we can carpool and get everybody over to the Tassel for that event. And I think if I remember right, that's supposed to get over at 8:30. Yeah, so roughly 8:30. But in the cell phone age, we will keep you informed about arrival times and stuff like that. If you have any questions about that, please talk to Robbie or Devin here or myself. Also, we'll be doing, we're finishing up Marked by Grace on Sunday, and we're going to be talking about the sent nature of the church, the apostolicity of the church. And so please join us for that, because I think we'll be putting a nice little bow on the end of that series and talked about how the church and our individual lives are marked by grace. And then I do have a slide up there for the Jason Wren event. Just to let you all know who this is, Jason Wren is a...
Jason or Justin?
Oh, Justin. I'm sorry. It's Justin Wren. My apologies. Justin Wren is an MMA fighter who, God really rescued out of some pretty serious problems, addiction, put him on a new path. He now is part of an organization he calls Fight for the Forgotten. and he works with the need for clean water in developing world countries, and generally has a really positive message, but presents that in a way that hopefully students will find credible. And it was hearing somebody with a story like Justin's that ultimately led to me returning to my Christian faith. So I think it's a really important thing that they're bringing in this speaker, and something that I think that we should be encouraging. Join me for a word of prayer. Father, we know that the brokenhearted and hurting in our community often reach out and receive nothing. We know that our world is torn by division and nowadays isolation. We know that people hurt and go unheard. Lord, use us. Use our stories, not just the stories that we're comfortable sharing, but the places where you've been present in brokenness, to help us to reach others with kindness and grace, with empathy and love, so that people don't feel isolated and alone, but find the help that they need and the support for the tough road. Grant that we might have eyes to see where those opportunities are among us in our everyday lives, and give us a sense of purpose and courage to break the taboos of culture that say that we shouldn't discuss such things, and instead be people who are bearers of kindness to others. All this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.